Snowflakes drifted across the black sky like slow-falling ash, sifting through crenellations and tangled banners as night settled hard upon Winterfell. The castle's courtyards lay hushed beneath fresh powder, torches hissing and popping while watchmen stamped their boots and muttered about the cold. In the great hall, heat shimmered above braziers, and the scent of roasting boar mingled with pine smoke and damp wool. Yet even the crackle of logs could not soften the iron edge that had crept into nightly suppers since Jon Snow's return from the Wall. Sansa Stark sat at her brother's left, posture stately, eyes luminous in the firelight. She wore deep emerald velvet trimmed in white marten, her copper hair gathered in a modest braid that brushed the fur lining of her mantle. Those who glanced her way saw dignity and composure, yet beneath the silk of her gloves her hands trembled faintly, and the rhythm of her breathing betrayed a mind racing faster than drummers' sticks at a harvest dance. Opposite, Peter Baelish reclined with deceptive ease. One boot crossed over the other, fingers lightly steepled. The faintest ghost of a smile played at the corner of his mouth, a smirk for which he had long ago learned to atone with lavish courtesies and carefully placed largesse. He watched Sansa, not directly, but through reflections. In the polished rim of a flagon, in the watery shine of spilt ale on oak, wherever her gaze drifted, toward Jon, toward the scarred dais, toward the rush-strewn floor, Baelish's half-lidded eyes were already there, anticipating, nudging, shaping. Jon himself wore no crown tonight, though the lords of the north had named him king. He preferred the plain black leather of the Night's Watch, as if clinging to the vows he had once spoken on frozen stones. Snow melted upon his shoulders and dampened the wolf-pelt collar, yet he scarcely seemed to feel it. The burden of command weighed heavier than any chill. Each day brought riders with tidings of wights sighted beyond last hearth, of wildlings fleeing something older and more terrible than winter. Jon's answers were forged in steel and sacrifice. Food stores, dragon glass, ravens to old allies grown distant. He gave little thought to the whispered resentments blooming in shadowed corners. Littlefinger gave them all his thought. He had watched kings rise and queens burn, fortunes bloom and rot. He knew the currency of power, the price of loyalty, the sweet yield of betrayal. With every conversation he cultivated soil for seeds of doubt. A jest here about bastards in high places, a rueful sigh there regarding King's Landing's whims, a gentle lament that land and lineage belonged by law to the truest born of Winterfell. Always he spoke low, almost reluctantly, as though the sentiments pained him. Such reluctance lent them weight. Sansa had resisted at first. She had reminded him she was Lady of Winterfell in truth only because Jon had placed the honor upon her. She spoke of Jon's courage, of how he had died for the realm and risen to defend it again. Littlefinger listened, lips pursed in pious appreciation, eyes shining with admiration for her loyalty. And then he would murmur something about how courage so often led good men to early graves, and how sometimes a sister's duty was to guide, to shield, to act before folly ruined all. Night after night, supper after supper, the murmurs grew. Lords who had named Jon their king grumbled about wildlings stealing grain, about southern envoys bringing plague, about a king who spent more nights on the battlements than at council. They eyed Sansa with a mix of envy and supplication. Her smile steadied them. Her silence unnerved them. Littlefinger let their frustrations age like wine, knowing he need only tilt the cask when the vintage was ripe. It came sooner than he dared imagine. The raven arrived on a wind that rattled every shutter. Its message bore Queen Cersei's golden lion and spoke in florid menace. Bend the knee, send hostages, or receive the justice of the Iron Throne. Its timing, Baelish knew, could not be coincidence. Whispers traveled faster than birds, and the queen had long threads of her own. He watched Jon read the letter aloud to his gathered bannermen, voice calm but tight as drawn bowstring. Muttered curses greeted each honeyed threat. Sansa studied Jon's face, noting the muscle that flickered along his jaw when he read the part naming him bastard once more. Later, in the solar whose walls had heard so many stark secrets, Littlefinger approached Sansa alone. She stood by an arrow slit, pale winter sun glazing her cheek. Bad tidings seldom travel alone, he began softly. The queen's quill is but the first spear in a volley. She will find the north is not so easily cowed, Sansa replied, though uncertainty hid beneath her pride. Baelish inclined his head. Undoubtedly, yet consider, while we brace for southern swords, what of the dead ones marching from the north? Steel will not feed the hungry. War on two fronts is a luxury no realm can afford, least of all one led by a brother whose heart outpaces his caution. Her eyes narrowed. He is my brother, Lord Baelish, in all but name, and you love him for it. I would expect nothing less. He spoke with the tenderness of confession. And love, dear Sansa, can blind even the wisest. Yet admire it too dearly, and Winterfell may drown in its own admiration. What are you saying? I say only this: there must ever be balance. Jon's honor is the sword. Your prudence must be the shield. Used together, a king and his lady sister could weather any storm. Used in opposition, he let the sentence fade, leaving her to imagine the wreckage. That night she dreamt of the crypts, rows of stone kings whose eyes followed her while she searched for Jon among the dead. When she found him, his direwolf cloak was crusted with rime, and his skin shone like blue ice. He smiled with someone else's mouth and called her little sister, in a voice not his own. She woke gasping, heart hammering, the taste of cold iron on her tongue. Days stretched, brittle and hollow. Jon drilled recruits until his shoulders throbbed, then pored over ledgers until dawn painted frost upon the windows. He scarcely slept. One eve, Sansa carried a trencher of brown bread and onion broth to his solar, determined to force rest upon him. She found him bent over parchment, quill dripping, eyes red. "You should eat," she urged. He glanced up, a ghost of a grin fighting through fatigue. "When there's time." "You make time." She set the trencher down and folded arms. "You lead men. If you collapse, the north collapses with you." A smile tugged one corner of his mouth. Spoken like a true lady of Winterfell. She flushed at his praise. "I mean only to keep you alive," she said, but felt the words twist within her. Alive, alive. The dream returned, Jon smiling with a dead man's eyes. She shivered despite the embers glowing in the hearth. He noticed. "Are you well?" "Tired," she lied. "The shifting winds unsettle me." Before he could stand, she retreated. Outside the solar, the corridor yawned dark as a well. She walked blindly until a voice crawled from shadow. "Each night he presses harder. Heavy is the crown, heavier the conscience." Sansa stopped. Littlefinger leaned in an alcove, arms folded. "He trusts you," he murmured, "as he trusted your father. Jon will listen to you if no one else." She bit her lip. "How can I help him when he refuses sleep? Convince him." A soft laugh. "Persuasion comes in many forms. A plea, a promise, perhaps a threat. Heed me, my lady. True loyalty sometimes demands us to do what we dread most, so that those we love may live." His eyes glimmered like dark water catching starlight. "Words alone may fail," he finished. "Then action must speak." A storm rolled over Winterfell the next fortnight, drumming sleet upon slate roofs, turning the gods' wood into a cathedral of ice. Jon left with 100 men to inspect the rebuilt fortifications at Eastwatch by the sea. He took Ghost, left the council to Sansa, and promised to return within 10 days. Littlefinger saw an opening wide enough to march an army through. He sought Sansa in the library where she pored over Cersei's second raven, whose threats had grown more barbed. Baelish lowered himself beside her, resting fingers upon the parchment casually, as one rests a hand upon a friend's shoulder before delivering hard truths. "You read, you ponder, you weigh, but still you defer." He leaned closer, while Jon forges ahead, oblivious to daggers at his back. "Daggers?" Her voice was a brittle whisper, figurative, though the literal may not be far off. "Cersei's quill grows sharper daily. Soon she will draw blood, and Jon, he will be at Eastwatch, too near the enemy beyond the wall. One arrow loosed by an unseen hand, and the north is rudderless." His words fluttered like raven's wings inside her skull. She pressed clenched fists to her thighs. "What would you have me do?" she asked, though dread already unfurled the answer before her. Littlefinger smiled gently, almost sadly. "Secure the realm," he said. "Remove chaos before it swallows us. If a ship is tethered to a stone and that stone sinks, the crew must cut the rope or drown. Your brother, I fear, is that stone." Sansa stood so quickly her chair skidded back. "You discuss murder as though brokering grain. I discuss survival." He rose too, voice low. "Do you doubt the dead will march? Do you doubt the Lion Queen hungers for northern flesh? Do you doubt that Jon will ride south to meet her, leaving Winterfell naked to the winds?" Each question hammered steel into his argument. "Ask yourself, my lady, which death do you truly fear? One quick blade, or the slow agony of your people starved, enslaved, butchered?" She trembled. Tears burned unshed. "Let me guide you," he whispered. "It need not be blood-soaked. Accident, illness, misjudged footing on a frozen parapet." "Stop!" She clamped hands to ears, but the words had already slithered inside. He paused, head bowed in apology. "When the dead come," he murmured, "they will not heed your pleas. Act now, and you may save 10,000 souls. Delay, and you condemn them." He left her alone with the flutter of parchment, the howl of winter beyond shuttered glass, and the terrible weight of choice. The days until Jon's return crawled, each marked by small betrayals of the heart. Sansa avoided the Godswood where they had once reminisced, avoided the training yard where he had sparred with wildling allies, avoided the chamber where she might smell his pinewood soap lingering in the chill. Instead, she walked battlements in silence, sometimes glancing down at patches of ice-slick stone. A misplaced foot, a gust of wind, so simple. At supper, she said little. Lords exchanged uneasy glances. Maester Wolkan murmured that her humors were unbalanced. He offered broth laced with valerian. She refused. Sleep came rarely, and when it did, it brought dreams of snow stained red, of Ghost whining over a lifeless body, of Littlefinger's fingertips brushing her cheek while Winterfell's towers burned behind him. The night before Jon's expected return, she summoned Baelish to the solar. A single candle lit the table between them, the flame tall and still. "I cannot do it," she said. "Do you hear? I will not kill my brother." Baelish regarded her, expression unreadable. "I hear," he said softly. "I have heard your heart, loud as thunder." He leaned forward. "But hear mine. Cersei has hired sellswords from Essos. Their fleet sails even now. When they land, every soul in the north becomes coin to be spent on her vengeance. Jon will ride to meet them, and they will gut him on a gilded spear. Then let that spear be her sin, not mine. She will not wait. She will employ cutthroats, bribes, turncoats. Here in Winterfell, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps the hour he enters the gates." His hands flattened on the table. Better a clean strike of mercy by one who loves him than a butcher's blade in the dark. Sansa's breath hitched. She wanted to scream, to run, to rend the world that forced such choices. Instead she whispered, "How?" Baelish did not smile. Smiling now would fracture the fragile bridge of resolve between them. He spoke evenly, as a surgeon might discuss bonesaw and poultice. "Moon tea laced with the essence of nightshade. Painless sleep. He will take it from your hand without suspicion." She tasted bile. "He trusts me, as he should. Trust can be the deepest mercy." Tears spilled over. She dashed them away. I need time. Time is the one gift winter never gives." He stood. "I shall obtain what is required. When he returns, offer him rest. Let compassion guide your hand. All else will follow." He departed. Sansa collapsed into her father's old chair, sobbing into sleeves that once belonged to her mother. Across the hall, a tapestry of the dire wolf lorded over hearth and hound, silent, watchful, accusing. Snow whirled on the dawn. Jon rode through the gate, cloak flapping like a winged shadow. Sansa waited on the steps, smile brittle. He dismounted stiffly. 10 days on freezing roads had etched exhaustion into his bones. She embraced him, feeling the ridge of his spine through furs, feeling her own resolve shatter beneath the weight of that simple human warmth. "I've missed you," she whispered. "And I you." He squeezed her shoulders. "Come. We have much to discuss." In the great hall, lords gathered to hear his report. The wall's garrisons dwindling, wildling scouts vanishing, strange thunder wailing across the Frostfells. Sansa sat beside him, nails digging crescents into her palms. Her maids had brewed a kettle of spiced wine. The vile Littlefinger had given her lay heavy in her pocket, warm against her thigh. Jon's voice held none of the fear he must have felt. He spoke of alliances, of dragonglass mines pledged by distant friends, of hope glimmering like embers beneath ash. When he finished, applause rose, heartfelt and ragged. Jon turned to her then, smile soft. "Will you share our wine?" she asked, heart pounding a stag's gallop. "Rest first, brother. You deserve peace." He hesitated, then nodded. To peace, however fleeting. A servant poured 2 cups. Her fingers brushed the vial's glass neck. One tilt, a swirl, a final kindness. Jon lifted his cup. Across the hall she saw Littlefinger, half hidden behind a pillar, his eyes twin pits of black approval. He tapped 2 fingers against his breast, a silent benediction. Sansa's breath caught. Her hand trembled. The vial remained in her pocket. Jon noticed. "Sansa?" She stared into his eyes, the same gray that had watched over her in childhood, that had once ruffled her hair with brotherly affection, that had died for her and risen again. She thought of Arya's laughter, of Bran's visions, of Rickon beneath Ramsay's arrows. She thought of the stark words carved into winter air. "When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives." She swallowed. "To family," she said, raising her cup. Jon smiled, and together they drank. The wine slid down her throat thick as guilt. Jon's eyes brightened, cheeks flushing. The hall resumed chatter. She set her cup aside, hands cold as river stones. The vial still pressed her thigh. Baelish's gaze bored into her. She could feel fury gathering behind his measured mask. She forced herself not to look again. Later, Jon retired early. Sansa walked him to his chamber, arm entwined with his. Candles guttered as they passed. At his door he paused. "Thank you," he said, "for believing in me." She managed a nod before fleeing. In her room, she emptied the vial into the hearth, watching blue flames flare and die. The essence hissed like a snake denied its strike. Sansa sank to her knees, weeping not for the brother she had spared, but for the realm she might have doomed, and for the shadow soon to fall across them all, shaped like a mockingbird with razored wings. Littlefinger summoned her at dawn. She entered the solar, face blotched with sleeplessness. "You faltered." His tone was soft, but beneath lay steel honed to a killing edge. "I warned you what delay would cost." Sansa lifted her chin. "I will not be your dagger. Then you will be Jon's doom," he replied. "Cersei's fleet sails closer by the hour. When her blades sever his head, remember that you could have granted him gentler passing. Spare me your mercy." She turned for the door. "Very well." His voice chilled the room. "You have chosen sentiment over duty. We must now consider alternative paths." She froze. "What paths?" "Ones less reliant on your resolve." A delicate sigh. "You may go." She exited, heart throbbing. In the corridor stood a hooded shape she did not recognize, eyes glinting beneath the cowl. The stranger stepped aside silently, yet Sansa felt the faint scrape of metal from under cloak. Fear clawed her throat. She realized then that Baelish had not been courting her complicity. He had been buying time. Time needed to import men whose loyalty was measured in coin, not conscience. Men who would remove Jon whether she willed it or no, and perhaps remove her next if grief made her troublesome. In that instant, Sansa Stark ceased trembling. Fire hardened in her blood. She turned back toward the solar, but Littlefinger had already gone, slipping through secret passages older than the keep itself. The day's council began beneath an overcast sky. Jon stood at the high table explaining supply routes. Baelish lounged at the far end, attentive yet aloof. Snow fell in lazy spirals through the open shutters, gathering on sills like silent witnesses. Sansa entered with a stride that turned heads. She went to Jon's side, fingers brushing his sleeve. "My lord," she said, voice clear, "there is treachery in these halls." The room stilled. Baelish's eyes narrowed. She inhaled. "If I name that treachery falsely, may the gods strike me. But if I speak true, let justice answer." Jon's gaze sharpened. "Speak." Her hands shook, yet she did not look away from Baelish. "Lord Peter Baelish has conspired to undermine your reign. He urged me to poison you, claiming it mercy to prevent greater bloodshed. I refused. Now he plots with killers from the south to do what I would not." Gasps rippled. All eyes turned to the man called Littlefinger. He unfolded slowly, face composed. "My king," he began smoothly. "The lady misinterprets counsel born of concern." "That counsel was murder," Sansa snapped. "Spare your lies." Jon raised a hand. "To the words of a lady of Winterfell, I add my own eyes." He nodded toward the rear door. Two guards dragged forward the hooded stranger, now unmasked. A cell's word from the free cities, knuckles bruised, blade confiscated. "He was found outside my chamber," Jon said, a coin bearing the Queen's lion in his purse. Baelish's composure cracked, mouth opening, closing. "Do you deny sending him?" Silence. Sansa's voice was low but carried. "You taught me the game of faces, Peter. Now I see yours true." Littlefinger looked to each lord in turn, searching for an ally. None met his gaze. At last he smiled, but it was a smile born of ruin. "A moment of private word, your grace," he pleaded. Jon's expression was iron and ice. "There can be no private words where the sea. Roan was to be bought with my death." He turned to Brienne of Tarth. "Take him." Baelish backed away, voice rising to shrill protest. Then swords flashed silver, soldiers closed, and the whispering man who bartered kingdoms for coin and kisses found himself hauled toward the courtyard where headsmen waited. Sansa did not weep. She watched through the windows as snowflakes melted on the sharpened blade, each droplet catching dawn's light like a tear she would not shed. When it was done, she felt neither triumph nor relief, only the hollow ache left by a soul twisted in the forging of destiny. Winterfell awoke the next morning to stillness deeper than before. Jon summoned Sansa to the Godswood. Fresh snow muffled their steps. The weirwood's red leaves shivered as if listening. "Why did you not come sooner?" he asked quietly. There was no accusation, only worry. "I hoped to spare you pain," she answered, "and feared that naming him would destroy what trust remains within these walls." He signed with a trembling hand, remembering the last time she'd written to a queen Cersei, in a room of perfumed shadows, dreaming of lion cubs and silk gowns. How far that girl had fallen, and how far this woman must rise. Ravens launched into a sky the color of sword steel. Sansa watched until they vanished, then forced herself down to the yard where riders loaded sealed clay pots into leather-lined satchels. Each pot held a slosh of oil mixed with powdered phosphor stolen from the alchemists of King's Landing by a deserter years ago. Ignite the fuse, throw, and a blossom of greenish flame devoured everything it touched. Far less potent than wildfire, but potent enough, she prayed, to burn rotting flesh. Brienne mounted at the head of the column, helm gleaming. Sansa held out a small polished disc of bronze etched with the Stark direwolf. "For Jon," she said. Brienne accepted, brow softening. She raised a fist to the men and spurred her horse through Winterfell's gate, snow spraying behind hooves. Sansa watched until the last flash of steel disappeared into the storm-dim horizon, feeling as though pieces of her heart rode with every saddle. The days that followed hammered Winterfell like relentless surf. Ravens arrived in grim procession, Eastwatch's walls buckling under icy breath, Glover wounded but defiant at White Harbor, Sell sails dragging trebuchets ashore, dead forging a ladder of corpses against the wooden palisade north of the keep. Sansa met each report with stony resolve, issuing orders, bolstering morale, standing tall at feasts she could scarcely eat. She visited the smithy to watch arrowheads bathed in molten dragonglass, the sparks reflecting in her eyes like shards of a shattered star. She stood atop the battlements in midnight hours, listening to the distant growl of thunder beyond the treeline, thunder that might have been the march of an undead legion. Lord Barbary approached one snowy dusk, cloak snapping. "My men grow restless," she declared. "They hear tales of white harbors gold ripe for plunder once Manderley falls." Sansa's gaze hardened. "Tell them any who ride for gold while winter stalks our hearth will find no gate open when they return." "Harsh words from soft lips," Barbary sneered. "Soft lips can speak steel," Sansa replied. "Do not test how sharp." For a heartbeat, silence crackled. Then Barbary smiled thinly and withdrew. On the 12th day, a horn again shrieked from the ramparts. 3 wails, long and mournful. Enemies at the gates. Sansa and Royce rushed to the wall walk. Below, shapes moved through the swirling snow. Figures in patchwork armor, pelts caked with frost. Wildlings. At their center rode a massive man with a red beard crusted white. Tormund Giantsbane. The guards hesitated until Sansa shouted, "Open the gate!" When the doors parted, Tormund led a ragged procession inside. Half his men were wounded. Others bore bundles wrapped in cloaks' bodies. He slid from his horse and strode toward Sansa, exhaustion bowing his shoulders. "Where is Jon?" she demanded, icy fear blooming. Tormund's eyes brimmed fire yet unextinguished. "He held Eastwatch's causeway 3 nights while we fled. We split, he Davos, a handful of your black cloaks. He ordered me south to warn you." Her knees weakened. "Brienne and the riders?" she asked. Tormund shook his head. "Didn't see them, but I saw flames on the horizon. Could be your work." Royce muttered a prayer. Sansa steadied herself. "You will rest here," she told the wildling. "Your wounded will be tended. Then we fight on." Tormund's grin cracked weary lines in his beard. "I, little wolf, we fight." When she reached her chambers, she allowed herself one breath, then another. Tears threatened, but she swallowed them. Jon might yet live. Until proof arrived, hope must breathe. She crossed to her writing desk and unfurled fresh parchment. "To Lord Commander Snow, wherever duty carries him." She paused, quill hovering. The words would ride with the next scouting party, pinned to any arrow loosed into the dark. She wrote of Winterfell's readiness, of Vale Knights reinforcing White Harbor, of her faith. She sealed it, pressed it to her lips, and handed it to a courier bound north. Hours later, a gale rattled shutters. Lightning forked across low clouds, illuminating snow with blue fire. Sansa stood at her window, heart galloping as thunder rolled. Yet the rumble felt wrong, deeper than sky-born wrath. A moment later came a bellowing roar, so vast it shook frost from timbers. A dragon's cry, echoing across night. But not the shriek of ice. This was lower, reverberant, alive. She craned her neck. From the southern horizon a blaze rose, a comet of gold and crimson arcing through naval clouds. Flames licked the dark, outlining vast wings. A second roar joined the first, then a third. Dragons. Real dragons, not undead mockeries. Her knees buckled. She clutched the windowsill. Far to the south, Dragonstone's queen had answered. Joy warred with terror. Dragons could burn foes, but they could just as easily shatter fragile alliances. She whispered a name, Daenerys. Would the mother of dragons still heed Jon? Would she heed Sansa? Below in the courtyard, men spilled from doorways, shouting and pointing skyward. Tormund's laughter boomed. Royce gaped. Then a new sound drifted over the ramparts. Horns, deep and disciplined. Sansa hurried atop the battlements again. Beyond the glow of scattered torches, a long line of torches flickered, an army approaching from the west. Steel glimmered beneath them. At their head fluttered a banner quartered in red and black, a trident and a wolf entwined. Sansa's breath caught House Tully. Her uncle Edmure had escaped Riverrun at last, bringing River Lords north. And beside that banner rode gold and red, the Baratheon stag above a flaming heart. The sigil of Queen Shireen, Stannis' daughter and rightful heir in the south, long thought lost but rumored to lead loyal men who had sworn to her cause. If she lived, too many miracles to count. Sansa clasped frozen fingers against her lips, unable to speak. Allies converged, dragon's sword. Yet the dead advanced still unseen beyond the treeline. Hope and dread twisted together, roots of the same ancient tree. She descended the tower steps in a rush to greet the arriving columns. Snow flurried around her, turning to steam where dragon flame licked the sky. Men shouted, wolves howled, bells rang from the broken first keep. Winterfell pulsed with life on the brink of extinction. The yard became a chaos of banners. Edmure Tully embraced Sansa fiercely, eyes red. He introduced river knights, Blackwoods, Malisters, Freys of the righteous branch who had cast out kin loyal to House Frey's treachery. Behind them strode a young woman in black and gold armor, face half hidden by a helm wrought like antlers. She removed it, revealing soft features marred by scars of fire and faith. Shireen Baratheon, grown yet bearing the patchwork of grayscale healed many years prior. "My Lady Stark," she said, voice steady. "My father died fighting for the realm. I intend to finish his work." Sansa bowed. "Winterfell welcomes you." She glanced skyward. One war ends tonight, or the world ends with it. Above, 3 dragons circled, gaining altitude before banking north, fiery contrails marking their path. A fleck of dark shape clung to the largest's back, a rider clad in white wolf fur. Her breath caught. Jon. He had lived, found Daenerys, mounted a dragon's saddle. The sight struck her with awe and fear at once, for dragonfire could scorch friend and foe. Yet no time remained for wonder. Shouts rose from the northern wall. A horn wailed 3 times, then again and again, until the sound blurred into a continuous bellow. Sansa sprinted for the wall walk as thunderous drums shook the earth. Snow parted before a tidal wave of darkness sweeping between trees. Wights, scores, hundreds, thousands, glittering beneath moonlight like silvered charnel. Skeletal horses screamed, skeletal wolves loped, blue-eyed giants lumbered whipping tree trunks as clubs. And above them, beating wings of night, the ice dragon Viserion shrieked, frost trailing its maw. The battle for Winterfell had begun. Sansa's lungs burned. She drew the sword Jon had given her before riding out, the first sword she had ever held in earnest, lighter than she had feared yet colder than any nightmare. She turned to the men beside her. Vale archers knocking dragonglass shafts, river knights gripping shields, wildlings tightening axe thongs. "For the north," she cried. "For the realm," they roared back. And then the horde hit the walls, and the world became fire and shattering ice. She did not think of Baelish's whisperings, nor Hornwood's leers, nor Barbri's doubts. She thought only of Jon above on Dragonback, of Arya somewhere within shadows, of Bran's quiet visions, of their parents' words. The pack survives. She swung, and frost-stiff sinew parted. She stumbled, Brienne's shield braced her. A giant's club smashed crenellations yards away. Men screamed. Flames roared where a dragon of living fire swooped low, Daenerys' silver hair streaming behind her like a comet tail. Day followed night followed day, though none could later tell how long that battle raged. Sansa fought until her muscles screamed, until her ears rang with steel against bone, until every heartbeat seemed the last. She saw Lord Royce drag a blue-eyed giant from the breach with a hooked chain, saw Shireen Baratheon hurl torches from the parapet, her face lit with reflected fire. She saw Barbary Dustin's men rally to a defense, redeeming doubts in blood and screams. And when at last the ice dragon stooped, freezing walls and crackling white, Sansa thought doom upon them, until a shape streaked beneath ice-scale belly. Jon astride regal, twisting in reckless dive. A shining spear of dragonglass tipped with obsidian fire drove into the undead creature's throat, and brilliant white fire erupted outward, blistering the sky with steam. The ice dragon shrieked once, twice, then shattered, fragments raining like blue crystal hail upon the dead below. The whites faltered, as if their tethers snapped. Dragonglass edges bit deeper. From the Treeline came Brienne's riders, the ones Sansa had sent. Flaming pots arcing overhead, smashing into ranks of corpses, igniting them in green conflagrations that roared like wrathful gods. One by one, the dead collapsed, breaking apart as frost-laden puppets cut from strings. When dawn finally bled across the horizon, only smoldering heaps remained. Silence descended, pierced only by the hiss of cooling stone and the ragged breaths of the living. Sansa stood amid it, sword dangling, vision blurred. Jon dismounted beside her, boots sinking in ash-muddied snow. He pulled her into an embrace that trembled with exhaustion, relief, grief for those lost. "You held," he murmured. "You returned," she answered, voice raw. Above them, dragons wheeled, victorious yet scarred. Behind them, Winterfell's walls stood cracked, scorched, but standing. And within her, beneath grief and ash, a seed of fierce, unbreakable resolve took root. She had survived poison of mind and peril of blade. She had faced armies of the living and legions of the dead. Whatever storms might come, lion fleets, southern queens, treacherous lords, she would meet them, sword in hand, heart unflinching. For the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. And under a sky cleansed by fire and snow, the pack had proven its strength. Ash mingled with snow in the bruised dawn that followed Winterfell's deliverance, drifting like gray pollen over broken ramparts and frozen pools of blackened blood. Smoke still curled from arrow-splintered beams where pitch had burned hottest, and everywhere men walked dazed amid the wreckage, as if uncertain whether they trod a waking world or some purgatory earned by valor. The living moved slowly, speaking in murmurs, listening for sounds that no longer came. The hollow clatter of white bones, the shiver of ice-scaled wings, the thunder of a giant's charge. Only the soft wind answered, carrying the sour-sweet scent of char and the distant cries of carrion crows. In the silent hours before sunrise, Sansa Stark descended from the battlements and crossed the courtyard without escort. Her gray cloak swept back to reveal a simple dress mottled by smoke. She had stood through half the night aiding healers, binding tourniquets, whispering comfort to men who would not survive the melting of frost. Yet despite exhaustion that sank to her bones, she felt lighter than at any time since Littlefinger's shadow first darkened her thoughts. She had swung a sword and not faltered. She had held a wall and not broken. She had trusted the pack and seen it prevail. Somewhere deep inside, a locked door rattled, the door behind which childhood hopes had been sealed away. She dared not open it fully, but she let in one thread of sunlight. Near the Godswood Gate, she found Jon crouched beside a mound of furs that concealed a body. The dragon regal loomed beyond the inner yard, folded wings dripping meltwater down crenellations. Jon's hair fluttered in the steam of the beast's breath, damp with sweat and powdered with ash. He looked up as Sansa approached, and the lines of command fell from his face, leaving only grief. "It was Dolorous Ed," he said softly, touching the shroud. "He took an axe meant for me." Sansa knelt beside him, resting gloved fingers on the rough fur. He would have said he earned the right to complain about this in the next life. A thin smile ghosted across Jon's lips, then vanished. He rose heavily. Around the courtyard, men were laying rows of the fallen, separating those to be burned from those to be buried in frozen soil. Beyond them, Daenerys Targaryen stood surrounded by her Unsullied, speaking in low Valyrian. Her silver hair was matted with soot, cheeks streaked where tears had cut through grime. When she met Sansa's gaze across the distance, something passed between them. Acknowledgement, wary and tentative, of debts paid in flame. Jon followed Sansa's eyes. "She came because of your raven. She came because she loves you," Sansa replied without bitterness. "Whatever differences stand between houses, the world owes her thanks." Jon touched her arm. "Come with me. We must face the day." They walked together to the great hall, now lined with pallet beds where maesters tended wounded of every banner. The high table had been cleared for triage. Bowls of boiling water steamed beside charred hunks of bread and salt. Edmure Tully hobbled through the rows checking on his river knights. Lord Yon Royce distributed drafts of watered wine. Barbary Dustin sat against a pillar, left arm bandaged tight, while Brienne refreshed bandages at a makeshift station. Some men slept, twitching in nightmare. Others stared blankly, mouths silently shaping prayers. Jon mounted a dais that had lost half its carved direwolf railing, and raised his voice above the murmur. "The night has passed," he said, and despite its softness the hall fell quiet. "The dead have broken and the wall stands free, but victory is not peace. Our brothers fight still at White Harbor. Our food stocks lie charred, and Queen Cersei's fleet sails the Bight." He paused, scanning the assembly. Northerners, River Lords, Vale Knights, Baratheon retainers, wildlings, and unsullied alike. No single house won last night. We prevailed because we fought as one. If we forget that lesson, everything we bled for will crumble like the ice dragon's corpse. Heads nodded. A spark of unity glimmered where once suspicion had coiled. "First," Jon continued, "we burn our dead and honor them. Second, we rebuild the walls. Third, we march south to lift the siege at White Harbor and break the Lion Queen's chain. But we cannot march hungry." He faced Sansa. "Lady of Winterfell, will you oversee the harvest of every granary within 2 weeks' ride? Strip no family bare, but gather what we must." Sansa inclined her head, the weight of the task pressing like fresh armor. "I will." Daenerys stepped forward, voice carrying resonance unfamiliar to northern ears. "Dragonstone stores are yours," she declared. "My fleet will ferry grain up the narrow sea to White Harbor once we clear the blockade. And my dragons will fly to scout the Lion Fleet's positions." Royce eyed her dragons through the shattered doors, uncertainty knitting his brow. Jon reached for Daenerys' hand and squeezed. Subtle, but it steadied the room. Shireen Baratheon rose, cloak brushed with ash. She addressed the hall with a voice both shy and resolved. "I claim only the right to fight beside you," she said. "My father erred in pride. I will not. The Stormlands send lances, not titles." Claws rippled. Sansa felt a pang of humility. Once she had dismissed this scarred girl as a footnote to tragedy. Yet here Shireen stood, tempered by fire, offering swords to a realm that had forgotten her. As the council broke to labor, Sansa approached Daenerys where knights formed a respectful cordon. "Your Grace," she began, inclining her head, "Winterfell owes you its life." Daenerys studied her, eyes weary. Jon's letter bore more conviction than any plea for alliance. "I did only what a queen should. Answer the cry of infants yet unborn." Sansa hesitated. "I will not pretend trust grows overnight. But, thank you." Daenerys nodded. "There is one debt I still seek to pay." Her gaze drifted toward the ruins of the toppled library wing. "I swore vengeance on Cersei Lannister." Sansa felt old venom stir. Images of Ned's severed head, of Joffrey's smirk, of knights beneath Lannister men's jeers. "You will have no shortage of willing hands." Willing, yes. Capable, perhaps not. Daenerys' jaw tightened. Her fleet is ironbound, manned by cell sails hardened in the stepstones. Dragonfire can scatter them, but their scorpions can wound even Regal. I must strike swiftly, break their nerve before they anchor. We have a resource. Sansa glanced toward Gendry Waters, who spoke with Tormund by the forge entrance. Blacksmiths who know tar pitch, smoke pots, mirror shields. We can craft decoys, floating beacons to draw their bolts. Daenerys' lips curved. "You sound like Tyrion." Sansa shrugged. "Funny, I scarcely sound like myself." They exchanged a look, two women molded by enemies into tempered steel. Daenerys offered her hand. Sansa took it. Alliance inked in ash and sweat. Their palms bore matching smudges. The pyres were built beyond the eastern wall, stacked in concentric rings. First the Whites' shattered bones, then the northern dead, then allies fallen from river and vale, Baratheon and free folk alike. At dusk, priests of R'hllor intoned low chants while septons murmured canon. Snow fell in big lazy flakes, but as Daenerys whispered Dracarys, dragonfire whooshed in iridescent sheets, melting each flake before it touched the flames. The crowd watched in reverent silence, faces glowing orange, reflecting father and son, sister and friend swirling upward in sparks that danced toward the indifferent stars. When the fires dimmed, work resumed without rest. Entire keeps had to be buttressed. Every smith's hammer rang until dawn. Ravens departed hourly, wings heavy with inked pleas. Sansa commandeered the granary audits, riding to outlying holdfasts with a small guard. At Widow's Watch, she knelt beside a farmer's widow and promised her 3 lambs for every sack of barley. At Deepwood Motte, she negotiated timber shipments with Lady Asha Greyjoy, who had arrived with a dozen battered longships fleeing Euron's madness. Asha pledged oak beams if Winterfell promised safe harbor for her remaining men. Sansa agreed, sealing bargain with a clasp of forearms and a shared toast of sour pine ale. While Sansa scoured the countryside, Jon trained a composite vanguard. Unsullied phalanxes drilled beside Mormont axemen, Baratheon spears locked shields with wildling hunters, and Vale Knights practiced mounted charges through slalom rows of burnt pines. Rhaegal and Drogon circled above, banked by Daenerys' subtle pressures on their reins. Dragons and wolves, stags and falcons moved as one under Jon's ice-sharpened commands. Yet even amid cohesion, tension simmered. Glover's messengers arrived from White Harbor bearing grim news. A second wave of cell sails had landed farther up the coast, breaching the dunes at Flint's Finger, erecting catapults capable of hurling barrels of burning oil over defensive walls. Wyman Manderley remained alive but besieged. His larders dwindled daily. If Winterfell did not march soon, White Harbor would fall, and with it the North's only deep-water port. Royce urged immediate departure, citing Knight's restlessness. Tormund argued 1 more week to temper new recruits. Gendry insisted on waiting for smokepot barges to be finished. Jon paced the strategy hall like a caged wolf, torn between impatience and prudence. At last Sansa returned, cheeks rosied by wind. She heard their debate and waited until words faltered, then stepped into the circle of candlelight. "We leave tomorrow," she said, voice clear. "Every day we hesitate is a day Cersei feasts on fear. But we leave Winterfell strong. Barbary Dustin and Edmure Tully will command here, with garrisons enough to hold should remnants of the dead stagger south once more. The last whites flee like wolves without pack. Stray, dangerous, but scattered." Jon studied her, relief warring with worry. "Do we have grain?" "Enough for a month's march," she answered. "And seeds for replanting in spring should spring come. Deepwood Motte's men will escort wagons." Daenerys nodded slowly. "Then we sail." Marching from Winterfell felt eerily familiar to Sansa, echoing the night her brother Robb had led banners south years before. The banners had faded, but the stakes were no less mortal. She rode beside Brienne at the center of the column, flanked by Vale Knights whose lances reflected the pale sun. Snow clung to spruce boughs overhead, falling in glitter when hooves shook trunks. Ahead stretched Rhaegal's vast shadow, sweeping across fields. Behind came the rumble of supply wagons, creak of catapults, clatter of iron-shod boots. Gendry's smokepot barges rattled in parts upon flat sleds. Wooden frames daubed with pitch, bronze mirrored plates to catch sunlight by day and torchlight by night. Once assembled, they would float like innocent fishing skiffs, until dragonfire set their innards ablaze, sending billows of tar-black smoke across enemy decks. A clever trick perhaps, but tricks rarely survived chaos. Sansa prayed they would at least by minutes. 2 days they marched, skirting the King's Road to avoid deep drifts, fording streams numb as death kisses, sleeping beneath sky so clear the stars shivered. On the 3rd dawn they reached Flint Cliffs, overlooking the narrow straits where the Bight met the shivering sea. Below, ice floes creaked against slate teeth. Gulls wheeled, crying. Farther south glimmered the white spires of White Harbor, one spire dark where fire had gutted the lighthouse tower. Between the cliffs and the harbor lay a sea of masts. Cersei's fleet anchored in twin arcs, like pincers closing. Gray galleys of the Iron Fleet lashed prow to prow with storm-born contracts, Their sails dyed crimson and black. On raised forecastles crouched massive scorpion ballistae, gleaming in weak sun. From this height Sansa counted over 60 warships, not including support cogs. Jon convened council among snow-crusted pines. Gendry spread parchment depicting harbor soundings. "We assemble barges behind the point," he explained, tapping a sheltered cove screened by basalt. Smoke or daylight reflections blind the scorpions. Dragons dive as cover. Daenerys traced the outer arc of enemy hulls. Drogon will strike the western flank, Rhaegal the east. Once their lines falter, Unsullied sees the closest deck and pivot scorpions against Cersei's flagships. Royce frowned. "What of their reserves?" Shireen spoke shyly. "My Stormlanders will land south of the walls, approach by the old Smuggler's Creek. A distraction while barrels of pitch float down current. When lit, the tide carries fire into their moorings." Jon looked around the circle. "Every step depends on the one before. If any fail, all bleed." Tormund snorted. "Then don't fail." Riders dispersed, relaying orders. Snow thickened into a white hush. Even gulls fell silent. Sansa remained crouched over Gendry's map, tracing the curves of water and fire. He watched her, rubbing soot from his forearms. "You drew the plan that breaks a queen," he said. "I drew a hope," she corrected. "It may still drown." He straightened. "Steel sinks deeper than fear. Remember that." She met his eyes, ocean blue, frank, and nodded once. For a heartbeat she wondered what alternate life these words might have been spoken in. A life without crowns and dragons, where she might have walked a forge-side path with a bastard smith. Then horns sounded from the cliff edge. Reality swept aside fancies, and the hour of reckoning fell like a hammer on hot iron. The assault began at dusk when sky glowed violet, tricking scorpion crews into loosening cloaks. From the hidden cove Gendry's men slid 7 barges into the swell, each cloaked in ragged nets studded with fishbones to appear as flotsam. Atop each barge lay a bronze mirror angled toward the sinking sun, catching its dying glare and flashing it directly at the scorpion gunners just as torches bloomed along decks. Sailors cursed and raised hands to shield eyes. An instant's blindness. In that instant dragons struck. Drogon plummeted from the clouds, black wings folded tight, belly skimming crests before he opened jaws and spewed a torrent of incandescent fire across the starboard flank. 3 galleys burst like tinder. Canvas sails vaporized. Rigging snapped, shrieking. Men leapt screaming into freezing water. On the eastern line, Rhaegal's flame was greener, tinged by Sansa's powdered phosphor. It roared across scorpion towers, limbs and winches exploding into molten debris. Shots loosed early veered wide or fell short, hissing into foam. From the shore, Unsullied surged in narrow boats, shields raised overhead to deflect crossbow bolts. Jon rode among them, black cloak whipping, Longclaw's white pommel shining. His boat grounded against a burning hull. He leapt, cutting through dazed sail sails before they could rally. Sansa watched from the cliff, heart trapped in her throat. She could see Jon only as a flicker amid chaos, silver blade carving arcs of red. But her eyes fixed on the central flagship, the Lion's Vengeance, which remained unsinged behind a screen of sacrificial galleys. On her mast flew the Golden Lion above a sheaf of arrows. Rumor said Euron Greyjoy captained her, or perhaps Harry Strickland of the Golden Company. Whoever stood upon her quarterdeck held back, waiting for dragons to commit. Daenerys saw it too. She wheeled Drogon higher, preparing a dive so steep it blurred wing edges. Below, the lion scorpions tracked patiently, angle adjusting. On the cliff Sansa seized a horn and blew 2 long notes, the signal for the barges. Rowers heaved. Hidden fuses hissed. Suddenly dark plumes erupted from the barges, billowing clouds of oily smoke that raced across still water propelled by chilled breeze. Within moments, the scorpion crews on the flagship vanished behind a veil of stinging blackness. Drogon plunged through the smoke like a demon from fable, fire streaming. The flagship vanished in a roar, its mast snapping. When smoke rolled aside, only a twisted husk burned, her lion swallowed by flames. Cheers rippled along cliffs. Sansa lowered the horn, legs trembling. She saw regal banking, wings riddled with small punctures but steady. Gendry pumped a fist. Brienne exhaled a sigh like a drawn bow released. Yet victory had its price. On the western flank, a surviving scorpion scored a glancing hit on Drogon's tail membrane. The dragon roared and veered, sending Daenerys slamming against saddle straps. He spiraled but regained lift, disappearing inland. Enemy deck crews cheered, and in that moment Unsullied boarded their vessel, spears punching through chainmail. What cheers remained turned to gurgles. Night closed around battle's edges, but by midnight torchlight revealed only drifting wrecks. Jon's men secured docks choked with kindling. Vale archers lined ramparts of the torn harbor wall. When Sansa descended with reserve riders, defenders parted in awe, whispering of the lady whose mirrored barges blinded scorpions. In the market square she found Jon gripping a broken oar's crutch. His left leg bled through a hasty wrap. He grinned when he saw her, but fatigue hollowed his eyes. "Is it done?" she asked. "The sea belongs to dragons again," he replied. Ironborn survivors fled north, rowing like devils. His grin faded. "We paid. Half the Unsullied lost. Glover lies wounded in the keep, but White Harbor stands." Sansa clasped his forearm. "Then the north still breathes." They entered the Merman's keep together, greeted by Wyman Manderly's booming relief. The lord was thinner, beard singed, but his heart as large as ever. He declared a feast of pickled herring and stale hardtack, last provisions unspoiled, and none refused. At dawn, funeral pyres on shifting sands sent black columns skyward. Daenerys limped among her dragons, stroking scorched scales. When Sansa made to praise her valor, Daenerys surprised her by embracing her tight. "You saved my child," the Dragon Queen whispered, voice quivering. Sansa realized she meant Drogon, not Jon, and her arms tightened. In that moment, they were just two women who had lost too much and feared to lose more. News of the shattering of Cersei's fleet spread across Westeros like fire across dry grass. At King's Landing, the Lion Queen raged, ordering red priests to foretell vengeance. Ravens reported that the Golden Company began fortifying the Rose Road, while Euron Greyjoy's last Ironborn scrambled into Blackwater Bay. Farther south, Dorne raised banners of the Sun and Spear, sensing weakness. Highgarden chafed under Lannister garrisons. Within White Harbor's repaired walls, a war council gathered. Edmure Tully spoke first, urging a march on Riverrun to liberate the Riverlands, then sweep south behind Lannister lines. Royce countered, arguing the need to take Harrenhal as staging ground. Tormund wanted to ride straight to King's Landing and bash the Golden Bitch's gates with her own skull. Shireen suggested uniting with Dorne across sea lanes once cleared. Sansa, cheeks pale with weariness, listened until voices frayed. Then she stood. "Cersei's power lies in fear," she said. "She projects invincibility. Break that image and her bannermen will fracture. We struck her fleet, so strike next where her reach once seemed longest. King's Landing's granaries. Without food, gold buys nothing." Daenerys nodded slowly. "Drogon's wings can burn fields from the Crownlands to the Gold Road in a day, but innocent farmers will suffer." "Our father taught us wheat feeds armies," Jon interjected. "If we spare small folk, our cause appears just. Seize the storehouses, not torch them. Deliver grain to towns that bend the knee to Shireen's claim or to none. Let Cersei starve behind her walls while the people feast on her taxes." Tyrion Lannister, newly arrived after fleeing the capital disguised as a Septon, smiled from the corner. "I have always admired a clever siege. It needs only whispers to spread. The lion hoards while the wolf shares." Daenerys hesitated, but Jon touched her hand. "The cycle of vengeance ends by giving what they would take." She exhaled. "Very well, but the Golden Company stands between us and those storehouses. We must lure them out." Royce tapped a chess piece on the map. "The Trident still floods. If we threaten the Ruby Ford, their Sellsword cavalry will ride to hold the crossing. While they chase ghosts, river barges carry our host upriver. landing behind them. Edmure grinned. My son's first swim will be a good omen. Plans spiraled outward, timelines, supply counts, messenger ravens. Sansa found herself co-authoring strategy with Tyrion, trading sharp quips softened by mutual respect. She never forgot his kindness at King's Landing nor his refusal of her bed. In a world of shifting masks, Tyrion's face felt honest. Night wore thin before council adjourned. Sansa stepped into the courtyard where snow mingled with sea mist. Jon joined her, limping slightly. I worry, he confessed. We chase victories, yet the dead may rise again. The Night King is gone, but who claims his crown? Sansa's breath clouded. Prophecy speaks of cycles, but prophecy bends to will. We broke the longest night. We will break what comes next. Jon sighed. I fear war will rot us. One day we will wake and realize we've become the monsters we fought. She touched his cheek, feeling stubble like rough wool. Not while we remember, she whispered. Winter's ice taught us mercy. Dragonfire tempered it with justice. Hold to both. He leaned forehead against hers, the gesture of siblings born of different mothers yet forged by the same father's stern love. We may never return to quiet days, he said. Quiet days were never ours, she replied. But we will carve moments amid the storm. The march from White Harbor to the Trident unfurled like a tapestry of reclaimed hope. Small folk lined muddy roads with baskets of salted cod and winter apples. They cheered Daenerys's dragons swooping overhead, marveled at Unsullied in gleaming helms, and offered fleece to wildlings unused to southern courtesy. Northern men shared tales of Hardhome and ice giants. River lords recounted whispers of Lady Stoneheart stalking highway brigands, tales that sent Tormund into fits of laughter and Arya Stark, now emerging from shadows into silent contemplation. Yes, Arya returned. She slipped through camp one moonless night, gray water in her belt, face smeared with road dust. She greeted Sansa with the grin of a feral cat, their embrace fierce despite swords. Arya spoke little of her journeys but carried new scars on her arms, souvenirs of daggers turned aside. Sansa felt peace settle where worry had nested. Another Stark come home, even amidst war. At Maidenpool, ravens announced that Edmure's upriver feint drew half the Golden Company across the Tumblestone, leaving their infantry stretched thin. Daenerys lifted Drogon skyward, Sansa's polished mirrors reflecting sunset into the eyes of crossbow crews occupying a granary fortress near Duskendale. The dragon's fire licked close but spared the stores. Sellswords fled rather than burn. Bread caravans rolled behind, banners of wolf and stag fluttering. Small folk cheered, word of free loaves racing ahead like rabbits. Cersei's city garrison tightened gates, distrust blooming among hungry streets. More Sellswords deserted nightly, scaling walls to vanish into alleys where rumor said the Blue-Eyed Brotherhood offered new coin. In the siege camps outside King's Landing, Tyrion's tunnels undermined toll houses along the Blackwater. Gendry's smokepots reappeared atop barges drifting lazily with the current, screening unsullied rowers who cut chain booms. At the same time, Arya and a cadre of faceless initiates infiltrated the capital through forgotten rainwater drains, sowing seditious pamphlets. Bread for allegiance, knives for lions. Within a fortnight, grain flowed through hasty markets outside the walls, feeding refugees who once fled the north. Cersei's hold on loyalty cracked. Her hand, Qyburn, sent plague's rumor about tainted bread. Tyrion countered by publicly sampling each loaf. Qyburn's ravens shrieked of dragons breathing plague. Daenerys glided Drogon over Flea Bottom without fire, scattering rose petals to prove gentleness. At last, hunger tipped the balance. On a rain-washed dawn, bells clanged from the great September remains, bells of surrender. But they told a strange tale. The doors had been unbarred from within, and gold cloaks laid down arms not to Daenerys, but to Shireen Baratheon, escorted by Davos Seaworth and Gendry Waters bearing Robert's warhammer. Cersei retreated to the Red Keep with a handful of Queensguard. Euron vanished upriver in a skiff, rumor claiming he fled with a satchel of wildfire vials. Jon's host poured through the mud gate, led by unsullied shields. Sansa rode behind, gaze wary, recalling the stench of betrayal that once saturated these streets. She met eyes of beggars, bakers, and butchers' boys, their faces thin but hopeful. They approached the Red Keep under a white flag. Jaime Lannister emerged limping, golden hand gleaming dull, his remaining fingers stained with soot. He knelt before Jon and offered a ring of keys. "She will not yield," he warned. "She waits in the throne room, wildfire at her feet." Jon exchanged a glance with Daenerys and Sansa. Dragons could scorch stone, but wildfire turned flame to madness. Arya volunteered to slip inside, dagger poised. Tyrion insisted he speak to his sister one last time. In the end, they entered together, Tyrion, Jaime, Jon, Daenerys, and Sansa, each flanked by one guard. The halls were eerily silent. Tapestries once vibrant now hung in tatters. At the throne room doors, a faint green glow pulsed beneath seams. Tyrion's breath hitched. Wildfire caches lined the pillars, lids loosened, fuses trailing to Cersei's feet where she sat upon the Iron Throne. Crown askew, eyes bright with feverish fury. "Little wolves come to bark," she sneered. Her gown clinked, coins sewn into hem for weight. "Did you bring shades for your father, girl? He lost his head here." She flicked gaze to Sansa. Sansa felt ice within her veins, but her voice did not waver. "You lost more, your soul. Surrender the keep. No one else dies." Cersei laughed, a sound brittle as frost. "I loved my children. You would never understand." "I loved mine," Daenerys whispered, thinking of dragons slain, of Rhaegal's wound. Her eyes glowed. "Spare one city for them." Cersei rose, foot nudging a fuse. Jaime stepped forward. "Sister, a lion does not kneel," she hissed. "You already kneel to fear," Tyrion said softly. "Let it end." For a heartbeat, Cersei's resolve wavered. Tears brimmed. Then footsteps echoed. Arya Stark emerged from shadow behind the throne, dagger at Cersei's throat. "She will," Arya said. Cersei jerked, eyes wide, but wildfire would incinerate her first. Jaime moved, disarming the fuse with his gold hand. Jon strode forward, iron in his gaze. "It's over," Cersei sagged. Arya eased pressure, but Tyrion watched warily. "Take her," Daenerys ordered. Queen's Guard lowered swords. Wildfire jars were sealed. Cersei's wrists bound with rope that once tethered dragon bridles. As guards led her away, Sansa felt no triumph, only relief and a hollow ache where vengeance once burned. She turned, meeting Tyrion's somber nod. Justice, not slaughter, had prevailed. In the weeks that followed, Westeros reshaped itself like spring ice cracking into river shards. A great council convened in the Dragon Pit to forge new order. Shireen Baratheon, with Davos's steady counsel, was crowned Queen of the Seven Kingdoms by lords weary of lions and dragons alike. She pledged to rule by charter, not whim. Daenerys accepted the title of Protector of the Realm until Shireen came of age fully, choosing Dragonstone as her seat and renouncing claim to Iron Throne's spines, which melted in Drogon's flame, recast into plowshares gifted to each region. Jon declined every title but Warden of the North. He swore fealty to Shireen on condition that the North's customs be honored. She agreed, and reunited kingdoms ratified it. Sansa became Lady Protector of the North in truth, her voice equal to Jon's in council. Brienne was named Sworn Sword of both sisters, Wolf and Dragon, bridging houses once divided by sorrow. The Vale gained new respect for its service. Royce returned a hero. Riverlands celebrated Edmure's liberation, crowning his young son heir. Barbary Dustin rode home with deeper understanding of loyalty. Tormund led wildlings back beyond the thawing wall, promising trade, not raids. Cersei faced trial, not execution. Sansa testified without malice, her words measured. The queen was sentenced to serve in the ruined September among war orphans, living witness that crowns neither shield hearts nor spare fools. Some cried mercy too soft. Others saw wisdom in sparing a symbol bereft of teeth. As summer's first buds pushed through charred soil, Sansa returned to Winterfell aboard a river barge laden with seedlings and looms, gifts from southern allies grateful for bread. She walked familiar halls mended with fresh pine, listened to children laugh where once only ghosts had spoken. In the gods' wood she knelt before the heart tree and pressed a hand to rough red bark. "I nearly lost myself," she whispered, but the pack found the path. Snowflakes melted on pale leaves. Spring snow, the last gentle kiss of winter. She rose, hearing footsteps. John entered, ghost padding beside him. His gaze rested on her, warm. "Ready?" he asked. "For what?" "To live," he said simply. She smiled, the curve soft and real. Together they stepped out of the gods' wood into sunlight slanting gold across ramparts rebuilt stronger than before, while ravens wheeled overhead, not as omens of doom, but as messengers charting bright new paths across clear northern skies.